Sermon of the Week, Virgin, based on the book of Isaiah. Your country is so desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your land strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by strangers, he read out loud. The young boy of 9 years couldn't believe what he was reading. His somewhat pointed ears seemed to point further, and his skin began to tingle. His mother toiled over the hot stove preparing a lamb stew for supper. It was a hot day, even though September was nearing a close. She wiped the sweat from her brow as she stirred the contents of the iron pot. She added more carrots and some onion. Then she sprinkled on some pepper and the last of the salt. Salt was very expensive, but it was her husband's birthday, and she wanted this meal to be the very best. The 9-year-old was also sweating profusely, but did not seem to notice as drops of sweat rolled off his head and neck. All that is, except when a drop would smear the ink on what he was reading. "Mom, do you have a cloth? I'm sweating so much, but this is such a good part." She sighed, thinking he should get his own cloth, but she threw a small one his way. He grasped it and mopped his brow and neck. "Thanks," he said. Kids, she thought. He plowed ahead, and the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage and a vineyard, as a lodge and a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. He shook his head. "Wonder what that means," he said aloud. "What?" his mother said. He didn't hear and kept reading. "For Jerusalem is ruined and Judah is fallen, because their tongue and their doings are against the Lord, to provoke the eyes of his glory." A half smile came to his wet face. Finally, now that last line makes sense. Jerusalem, in fact, the whole country of Israel, is under Roman occupation. At least he got this right. But the rest, the daughter of the cucumbers, still makes no sense. He rolled the scroll out a little further, jumping ahead. "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the child shall know how to refuse evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings." He was now more confused than ever. His schoolmates had taught him something of the birds and the bees, at least their version. From what he had gathered, it took a man and a woman to have a baby. He realized his knowledge was somewhat limited in this area, so he decided to consult another source. "Mom," he yelled. Her stew was about to boil over, so she was adjusting the coals to not ruin her husband's birthday supper. "What is it, son?" "Mom, what's a virgin?" His mother did not respond. He thought she probably didn't hear him, so he got up and went over to her. She was back to stirring to prevent the stew from boiling over. She thought it was just about done. She noticed him. "What are you reading, son?" she asked. "Mom, what's a virgin?" he asked again. She stared at him for a bit. "What are you reading, son?" "Oh, the scrolls, the words of the prophet Isaiah," he said. "What was your question?" "What is a virgin?" he repeated. "Well, it's a young woman." "How young?" he pressed. "Well, a young woman who has not had a baby." She figured this would satisfy him. "Doesn't conceive mean she will have a baby?" he kept on. "My friends tell me that it takes a man and a woman to have a son. Son, I think you better ask your father about this stuff. This information is to be given by the son to the father or the mother to the daughter. But just tell me this, how can a virgin have a baby without son?" She cut him off. He realized the conversation was now over. He scowled and turned to go back to his scroll. "Son, please set the table," she ordered. He now knew his reading was over. He quickly rolled up the scroll, returned it to the shelf, and began the boring process of setting the table. His mind still churned with what he had just read and what he knew was not possible. He would ask his father later on about it, maybe. His father was not too talkative, especially when it came to delicate subjects. He thought maybe it would be better to talk to his older schoolmates. And then a smile came to his face. He would talk to the priests at the temple. He knew a couple of them, including old Zacharias. If anyone knew what the prophet Isaiah was talking about, old Zacharias would be the one. Isaiah the prophet may be the most well-known of all the prophets of the Old Testament. He is a most interesting character for many reasons. He was actually born of a royal line. He was of the royal house of Judah. His father was Amos, the brother of King Amaziah of King Judah. Amaziah reigned from 839 to 810 BC as the ninth of Judah's 20 kings. You will remember that in 930 BC, after Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel was split in two. 10 tribes became the northern kingdom of Israel, and Judah and Benjamin became the southern kingdom of Judah. Isaiah was born about 760 BC into the tribe of Judah and lived until 698 BC, thus prophesying for 40 plus years. His death is a bit complicated. King Hezekiah began to reign in 716 BC, but about 15 years before a king was expected to die, he would often make his son co-regent to prepare him to reign and maintain continuity of the royal line. Hezekiah's son was named Manasseh. Manasseh became co-regent at age 12 and reigned for 55 years, which included his co-regency with his father Hezekiah. Rabbinic literature says that Manasseh was Isaiah's grandson. For whatever reason, Isaiah fell out of favor with the young king. Likely it was because Manasseh did not buy into the preaching of Isaiah nor the religious practices of his nation. Judah, in fact. In fact, Manasseh is considered one of the most evil kings in history. 2 Kings 21 tells us that he revived Baal worship and had his own children pass through fire. Therefore, in 698 BC, King Manasseh had his grandfather Isaiah executed. Of interest, tradition and the Hebrew Talmud state that he, Isaiah, was sawn in half. One story says he fled from King Manasseh and hid in a cedar tree, which then was cut down. No details of Isaiah's death are recorded in the Bible, but Hebrews 11:37, when speaking of martyrs, states they were sawn asunder. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel in Rome, you know it is absolutely awe-inspiring. The recent tragedy of the fire in the Notre Dame Cathedral brought back the vision of my visit there, which I believe is also one of the most inspirational places on our planet. However, the sheer magnitude of the artistry and history in the Sistine Chapel places it at the top of the list. Michelangelo's depiction of the prophet Isaiah is magnificent, yet just above him is listed the name Manasseh. It is said God preserved the Garden of Eden, Patriarchs and Prophets, chapter 3. I think he may preserve a few more things in the earth made new. One of these on that short list might be Michelangelo's ceiling on the Sistine Chapel. Isaiah's prophetic career spanned more than 4 decades, and he lived during the reign of 5 of Judah's kings. Israel always seemed to exist in times of turbulence. From Abraham, its founder, down through its history, it was always a country or people in peril. During Isaiah's life, things were no different. Egypt and Assyria were the 2 competing world powers. The population of Egypt, Israel, and Assyria likely reached the realm of 3 million people. The Israeli army of King David was listed at 24,000 active soldiers in 1 Chronicles 27:1. It is likely that the army of Judah during Isaiah's time was similar. The Egyptian and Assyria's armies were much larger. Egypt was not in the aggression mode, but Assyria was. The 2 countries, Judah and the northern kingdom, were on the western border of Assyria, and the stories about the exploits of their god did not go unnoticed. King Sargon of Syria defeated and gained control of the northern kingdom of Israel in 721 BC. This was early in Judah's King Hezekiah's reign and 20 years into Isaiah's prophetic career. King Sargon's son and successor Sennacherib was also aggressive and placed Jerusalem under siege in 702 BC. He had defeated the Egyptians and taken control of Judah's second largest city, Lachish, 30 miles from Jerusalem. Likely the army of Judah was in the range of 20,000 strong, but we are told that Sennacherib took siege of Jerusalem with an army of 185,000 soldiers. I calculate that just to be short of 10 to 1 odds. The population of the walled city of Jerusalem at the time was around 20,000. Adding an army of 20,000, one can see the concern of the king and people when Sennacherib's massive military force takes position outside its city. Hezekiah now knows he's in real trouble, and he uses those exact words. This day is a day of trouble, Isaiah 37:3. His advisors recommend he call Pharaoh of Egypt for help, but he and they know Sennacherib has defeated Pharaoh along with everyone else in the Levant. He had previously built a tunnel to bring water into the city, but knows this will not help. His own prayers to God have gone unanswered. He now turns to his last best hope, the old prophet, Isaiah. They've not always been on the best of terms, but he calls for him nonetheless. Isaiah declines Hezekiah's offer, but does tell his advisors not to worry. He berates Hezekiah in scathing terms, and then says that God will blast Sennacherib and his army to smithereens. I'm not sure how God gets this information to Isaiah, whether by vision or dream or by angelic messenger. Isaiah receives the correct information and passes it on. The actual words are amazing to read. The virgin, the daughter of Zion, hath despised thee, and laughed thee to scorn. The daughter of Jerusalem hath shaken her head at thee. Whom hast thou reproached and blasphemed? And against whom hast thou exalted thy voice and lifted up thine eyes on high? Even against the Holy One of Israel. 2 Kings 20:21 and 22. There's that word virgin again. God here uses it as a term of purity. He created humanity in a state of purity and expected them to realize that they must remain pure to survive. Well, that lasted for only a few years in Eden and Israel, and now this country called Judah, the only country in the world at the time that called God their God, was as impure as all the rest. God had been patient with them, more than patient. The call of Abraham, who established the people of God after the flood of 2348 BC, came in 1921 BC. 1,219 years had elapsed. 1,219 years of destruction and death at the hands of man himself. To the amazement of the universe and even the angels themselves, God still, even now, remained patient. He got word to Isaiah and relayed this message to good King Hezekiah. Behold, I will send a blast upon him, Sennacherib. We are not told what the blast was. Most likely some nuclear device with some sort of protecting lead shield over the city. By the next morning, all that was left of Sennacherib's army was Sennacherib himself and 185,000 dead corpses. Sennacherib returned in disgrace to Assyria and was murdered by his own advisors. Shades of Julius Caesar's murder on the Ides of March, 44 BC. However, Isaiah's real claim to fame is his literary prowess. His name means God is salvation. One might consider him an early Shakespeare. He wrote just one book of the Bible named for himself. It, however, is the second longest book in the Bible and contains 66 chapters. It is oft quoted by New Testament authors and also by Christ himself. Christ quoted David's book of Psalms the most times, 11. In fact, as Christ was dying, he quoted Psalms 22:1 verbatim. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? However, Christ quoted Isaiah at least 7 times, the second most of all in the books of the Bible. I will now bore you with those 7 times. Number 1. Eyes do not see. Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. Jesus speaks in parables. Number 2. Mine house shall be called a house of prayer. Isaiah 56, 7. Jesus turns over tables in the temple. With their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, is number 3, Isaiah 29:13. Jesus speaks to the Pharisees. Number 4, my well-beloved hath a vineyard and a very fruitful hill, Isaiah 5:1. Jesus speaks of Isaiah's writings in his parable. Number 5, he was numbered among the transgressors, Isaiah 53:12. Jesus would be condemned to death. Number 6, all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, Isaiah 54:13. Jesus proclaims all should be taught of God. Number 7, the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek, Isaiah 61:1 and 2. Jesus speaks of his mission. His obvious inference here is that Jesus read the scrolls. No, Jesus studied the scrolls. We are not told whether Jesus had a photographic memory or what his IQ was, but by definition and in all fairness, he likely was very average with an average IQ. Romans 8:3, by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, declared Jesus' humanity. Philippians 2:7 is more emphatic, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. Isaiah too weighs in on this subject. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, Isaiah 7:14, and also, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, Isaiah 9:6. Jesus studied the scrolls and likely memorized many of them. Remember, there was no TV, no internet, no video games, no cartoons, and actually very little in the way of books, that is, scrolls, to read. Maybe he got a copy of Plato's writings somewhere, but of course that was written in Greek. I doubt God allowed him the miracle of reading in language he wasn't familiar with or didn't study. So Jesus, like other children, read the scrolls. It was the only account of history at the time that he would have had access to, and no doubt as he morphed into his role as the Messiah, he began to reread and memorize some of them. We are not told exactly when he realized that he was in fact the Messiah, the Savior of humanity. But at the age of 12, when he and his parents went to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, a yearly trip, the words he used in Luke 2:49 are very telling. Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Incidentally, Luke is the only place in the Bible that provides us this account. Luke was not one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Maybe he was his family's doctor. We are not told their exact relationship. Maybe he delivered John the Baptist or Jesus. In any event, he was a good observer, historian, and record keeper. Isaiah may have been somewhat like the Shakespeare of his day. He wrote of lives of kings, the rich, and the famous. He, like Shakespeare, sensed their wielding of power was often misguided and inadequate. Isaiah, however, often concentrated on the coming king. God spoke to his prophets and must have told Isaiah a lot about the future Messiah, the coming king who would save the world from destruction. His references to Jesus Christ are detailed and expansive. It filters through and through his book, so there can be no mistaking who Isaiah is talking about. By the time Christ the Messiah arrived, the whole world knew about it. The Jews, and in particular King Herod, knew. The priests knew. The Romans knew. It was no secret. Yet it was a secret. Everybody in the world knew a Messiah was coming, yet when he arrived, nobody knew he was there. It's absolutely beyond my comprehension that no one recognized the Messiah. Even after 30 years on this planet, no one really knew who he was. The first to fully grasp it was his own cousin, John the Baptist. The day John baptized Jesus in the River Jordan, the light came on. It didn't take long for that little light to illuminate the whole planet. In 3 short years, everyone knew Jesus was the Messiah, and 99% of them wished he'd never shown up. It is beyond all reason not to embrace the one person in all the world that can preserve it. Mind-boggling, truly mind-boggling. By the way, the definition of the word boggle is to be astonished or overwhelmed when trying to imagine something. I must constantly admit I am overwhelmed at the world's indifference then and now to the only one who can preserve their existence. Oh, for you spelling aficionados, the word boggle originated from a 16th century dialect. Fortunately, a couple guys set out to preserve the words of Isaiah concerning the Messiah. George Frederick Handel was born in Germany on February 23, 1685. He was somewhat of a child prodigy, noted for his playing of the organ. At age 18, he became violinist and harpsichordist for the Hamburg Opera. He continued to compose, and in 1710 was given charge of the music of the German Prince George. In 1714, that prince became King George I of England, and the rest, they say, is history. In England, a wealthy friend of Handel's, Charles Jennens, had written a text from the Bible, and in 1741 Handel took just 24 days to set the text to music. It has been played and performed limitless times since then. I often wonder if at least some of the music existed in the heavenly courts before it was given to George Frederick Handel. There's an old movie from 1942 called Great Mr. Handel. I saw it some years ago. If you can find a copy, take the time to watch it. I defy you to say that any human could produce the music that Handel did in just over 3 weeks' time. The Messiah opened in London to mixed reviews, but soon audiences warmed, and today it is doubtless the most listened to and beloved oratorio in the world. Mr. Jennens took much of his text directly from the book of Isaiah. I will bore you again with a few of them. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, Isaiah 7:14. The people that walked in darkness have seen a great light, Isaiah 9:2. For unto us a child is born, Isaiah 9:6. Every valley shall be exalted, Isaiah 40:4. He was despised and rejected of men, Isaiah 50:3. All we like sheep have gone astray, Isaiah 53:6. What Mr. Handel and Mr. Jennens did was immortalize Isaiah's words. They are indelibly linked in the minds of the vast majority of humanity, and hopefully will stay there until the Messiah himself returns and sings them with us in the earth made new. The book that Isaiah wrote for us and is still available to read is an amazing read. It is a book about history, music, humanity, futility, captivity, God's character, parables, foreign powers, idolatry, kings, judgment, war, and visions. In essence, it's a little Bible in itself. The prophet Isaiah lived in turbulent times. Some 200 years earlier, in 975 BC, his country, in fact God's country, in fact the only country in all the world that believed in the true God, had a civil war of sorts. It split into two separate countries, the northern kingdom and Judah, of who Isaiah was a tribe member. These two kingdoms were always at each other's throats, bickering, plotting, whatever. However, their greater threat was the surrounding nations, in particular Egypt to the south and Assyria to the east. The threat of these powers kept the northern kingdom and Judah from destroying one another, as the two were always being challenged by the two major powers and some lesser ones, such as Philistia. Isaiah was of royal blood and dodged and survived 5 different Judean kings: Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and Manasseh. Only Hezekiah is considered a good king of those 5, one that had a better than 50% approval rating. But God's promise in Isaiah came true, and he chose him to be a prophet. Isaiah was given visions by God. In fact, the very first verse of Isaiah's book begins with these words: the vision of Isaiah. He does not tell us just how he received these visions. He does not say if he was dreaming or in a trance or visited by an angel. Probably the best explanation is that given by John the Revelator as to what a vision is. He states in Revelation 1:10, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a great voice as of a trumpet. Other words of John indicate he was literally talking to someone, some spirit, some angel, some being. I assume Isaiah was in a similar state of mind. What is interesting is that they were able to remember word for word what they were told and able to write it down for posterity. Or maybe the angel or being who was there handed them a scroll with the information on it. In any event, it is preserved to this day. What What is telling is that the information provided to Isaiah and John and every other prophet for that matter is spot on. It is history written before the fact. There is no other instance of humans being able to foretell history accurately and in such voluminous amounts. There is just too much information for it to be lucky guesses. Psychics abound in the world and have for centuries, but their information is often educated guesswork. Oh, not all of it. Some of it does come from the dark side. Likely it is provided by Lucifer's boys, some medium as they call it. But the medium to what? Angels are diligent students of history and biblical prophecy. They know what will happen and when. However, they also know human nature better than humans and utilize that information to predict happenings in advance. What they can't always predict are natural disasters or major accidents, but they are excellent mind readers and can predict when a person will snap and perform some evil act. They can relay this knowledge to any psychic at any time it is needed. Isaiah was aware of psychic's existence. We are told specifically of one that King Saul of Israel consulted, the witch of Endor. She correctly predicted Saul's death. Of course, the angels knew of Saul's predicament and his tendencies. They knew the Philistine army was poised and would annihilate the Israeli army. Easy call. Well, Isaiah was told of events that were not easy calls. He was given fact after historical fact and remembered and recorded them for posterity. Isaiah often could not believe what he was hearing, but wrote it down anyway. I suspect his pen just scribbled along, not questioning what he was writing until one day in May. Of this thing is out of ink. Honey, can you get me some more ink? He yelled to his wife. Isaiah banged the pen against the table, but no more ink came out. Presently she returned with another bottle of black ink. Now, Gabe, what were you saying? I left off at, shall give you a sign. I said, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Hold it. This pen is not working well. He tapped the pen on the table and ink began to flow again. Now, go ahead. Behold, Gabe pressed on. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Isaiah wrote and talked out loud. Behold, a virgin shall conceive. Gabe tapped his foot in the wood floor. He was becoming impatient, as angels often do with humans. Behold, a virgin? Hold it. Whoa, wait just a minute. That isn't right. You got that mixed up. Behold, a virgin shall conceive? That's not possible. You better check your scroll, pal. I've got no scroll, Gabe said. Just right. Well, check your brain then. You got something crossed up in that thick skull of yours. No virgin in the history of the world ever conceived a baby or a dog or anything else. No, you got it wrong, pal. Can't be. Can't happen. Nada. Isaiah, just right. Gabriel gestured vigorously with his hand. I ain't writing that. That's garbage. Hooey. No, these are supposed to be words from God Almighty. I ain't putting that to paper. No, sir. You go back and check with him. You got that wrong. Isaiah stood up, shaking his head. I gotta go to the bathroom. You go back up and double check with him, then come back. I got enough energy to go another hour or so. Isaiah headed toward the back of the house. Suddenly, he felt Gabe's strong hand around his right upper arm. It stopped Isaiah dead in his tracks. The hand then picked him up and set him back down in his chair. Just right. Isaiah held up his hands, but did not pick up his pen. He just shook his head. Now, Gabriel threw up his hands. Okay, just sit there. I'll make a call. Gabe went to the corner of the room, raised his left wing, and began talking. Isaiah could hear the conversation, but could not make out the words. Presently there was a knock at the door. Gabe opened it, and in walked the most beautiful woman Isaiah had ever seen. She was tall, with long dark hair and the most beautiful amber eyes. She sashayed over to Isaiah and put her arm around him. Honey, Isaiah, it's true. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son. Isaiah was now literally in shock. He was also in love and speechless. She went on, and you know what? Isaiah shook his head. Over in the corner of the room, Gabe could hardly keep from laughing. And you know what they're going to call the baby boy, she said. Isaiah was now definitely in spirit and could not speak. He did manage to shake his head. They're going to call him Emmanuel. She leaned over and kissed Isaiah on the cheek. Isaiah became dizzy, but he knew what the name Emmanuel meant. God with us, Isaiah blurted out. That's right, sweetie, she whispered in his ear. Please write that down. I'll see you later. With that, she sashayed out the front door. Yes, dear, he called out. He looked up to see his wife enter the room. His new love and Gabriel were gone. Did you call? His wife asked. No, sorry. She thought he looked a little pale, but returned to the kitchen. His hand was shaking almost violently, but he managed to write down the words in what, to his surprise, appeared to be gold ink. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He sat back and shook his head in disbelief. He was not so sure he believed the words, but he knew he'd better believe, or likely the God of heaven would strike him dead as a doornail. Isaiah knew he would not sleep a wink this night, one prophecy that did come true. One thing we can deduce from Isaiah's book is that he had an edge to him. He uses terms like nevertheless, woe, burden, cry, rebellious, and fear. His dealings in particular with good King Hezekiah are a good example. But above all, what Isaiah gave us is the detailed story of salvation. He was the first to delineate the methods, purpose, and history of Christ's sojourn on earth to save the earth and all its inhabitants from eternal destruction. I imagine when Isaiah finally grasped it all, and lastly the conception of a virgin, he was overwhelmed by the beauty, the simplicity, the magnitude, and the meaning of it all. Isaiah 65:17 says it all. For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth. Let's return to our original hero. So what's this all about? He asked. He knew his mother would never tell him anything, especially about virgins. He doubted his father would either, but his old uncle, the priest Zacharias, his cousin Johnny's dad, would maybe tell him. Don't you know, son? Zach asked. No, Mom won't tell me anything, and Dad, well, he's hard to talk to. What is this virgin birth stuff? There's no such thing as virgin birth. All my friends laughed at me, said I was crazy. Maybe I am a little. Anyway, can you tell me? Zach nodded. Well, about 700 years ago, our prophet Isaiah wrote a little book. In it, he talked about someone who would save Israel from its enemies and set up a kingdom to rule the entire world in peace and harmony. Jesus nodded. I get that, but... Zach held up his hand. But this Messiah, as we now call him, was going to have a hard road. He was not only going to have a difficult time saving us earthlings, but he was going to die in the process. How could he save anyone if he was dead? Jesus asked. Well, it's like this. He would first save our nation, then die. But if he dies, who's going to be the ruler? Jesus quizzed. That's